Your home is not just a physical structure. It is a spiritual fortress, a sanctuary where your family's destiny is shaped daily. Every item, every object, every decoration carries spiritual weight. What you allow into your dwelling space directly influences the spiritual atmosphere and consequently your life's direction. Listen to me carefully. The enemy does not work through noise and spectacle alone. The enemy works through subtlety, through objects we pass by every single day without giving them a second thought. While you sleep, while your children play, while you pray in the morning, certain items in your home may be working against your breakthrough, against your prosperity, against your family's divine purpose. God has given you authority over your household. Jesus taught us that whatever we bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever we loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This means you have the power right now, today, to cleanse your home and establish spiritual dominion. But first, you must recognize the enemy's tools. The burden I carry as I share this with you is tremendous because I know that countless families are suffering needlessly. Children are struggling in school not because they lack intelligence, but because the spiritual atmosphere of their home is oppressive. Marriages are crumbling not because couples lack love, but because there are barriers between them that they cannot see. Businesses fail not because entrepreneurs lack vision, but because invisible chains bind their progress. The time has come for you to awaken to this reality. The time has come for you to take action. Begin with your mirrors. I do not say this lightly. Mirrors are reflective surfaces. Yes, but spiritually they are portals. In many ancient spiritual traditions, mirrors are understood as gateways between the physical and spiritual realms. When improperly placed or accumulated in excessive numbers, they can become channels through which negative spiritual forces enter your home. Think about the mirror in your bedroom, in your hallway, in your bathroom. How many times do you pass by these reflections? Every time you look into a mirror, you are creating a spiritual encounter. If there are too many mirrors, you are creating multiple doorways. The enemy uses mirrors to create confusion, to multiply negative thoughts, to establish spiritual traffic lanes into your home. The ancient wisdom keepers understood something that modern people have forgotten. What reflects in the physical realm also reflects in the spiritual realm. When you have mirrors facing each other, you create an infinite spiritual corridor. When you have mirrors opposite your bed, you are allowing spiritual intrusion into the most intimate space of your family life. I command you now, take inventory. Count the mirrors in your home. Are they necessary? Are they positioned to create peace or create passages? Remove the excessive ones. Cover those that face your bed. Reposition those in hallways. Your bedroom should have at most one small mirror, one that serves a practical purpose and nothing more. When you remove these mirrors with intention and prayer, something shifts. The spiritual atmosphere lightens. Family members report sleeping better. Children stop having nightmares. Why? Because you have closed the doorway that should never have been opened. Now, let us talk about what hangs on your walls. Every image, every piece of artwork, every photograph carries spiritual implication. I want you to understand something profound. You cannot separate the physical from the spiritual. An image that appears beautiful to your eye may be spiritually corrupted in origin or intention. Many families purchase artwork without understanding its spiritual genealogy. That beautiful abstract painting, who created it? What was the creator's spiritual state? What spiritual tradition does it represent? When you hang an image in your home, you are not simply decorating. You are inviting spiritual influence into your space. There are certain symbols, certain artistic styles, certain images that carry spiritual baggage. I'm not speaking only about overtly demonic imagery. I am speaking of artwork that was created with wrong intention, artwork infused with practices that oppose God's kingdom, artwork designed by artists whose spiritual foundation is contrary to the foundation of Christ. Some families have artwork depicting idols from other spiritual systems. Some have images created through practices involving meditation on false deities. Some have a modern art that, while not explicitly evil, carries the spiritual atmosphere of rebellion, despair, or darkness from the artist's soul. Your home should be filled with the images that speak life, healing, hope, and divine purpose. Religious imagery from your faith tradition, these are appropriate. Photographs of family moments filled with joy, these strengthen family bonds spiritually. Artwork depicting nature's beauty, these reflect God's creation. But artwork with questionable origins, artwork that disturbs your spirit even slightly, artwork created through false spiritual practices, these must go. I want you to walk through your home right now. Even as you listen to these words, look at each piece of artwork. Does it bring peace? Does it align with your spiritual convictions? Does it represent the spiritual foundation you want in your home? If you hesitate, if you feel even a slight unease, remove it. Trust that instinct. That is your spiritual discernment speaking. When you remove such artwork, light enters. The very air in your rooms becomes clearer. Family members breathe easier. The spiritual oppression that you may not have even consciously noticed begins to lift. Books are powerful. Words are powerful. The Bible teaches that life and death are in the power of the tongue. And I extend that truth to the written word. What is written and placed in your home speaks constantly, silently, powerfully into the spiritual atmosphere. Most families do not think about the spiritual content of their libraries. You have books inherited from relatives. You have books given as gifts. You have books purchased casually from stores. But where did these books originate? What spiritual foundation guided their writing? What is their true purpose? I am not speaking only of obviously occult books. I am speaking of seemingly innocent self-help books written by authors whose spiritual foundation is New Age, whose spiritual foundation opposes God's kingdom. I am speaking of philosophy books that subtly undermine biblical truths. I am speaking of novels that normalize sin and darkness. I am speaking of books on spirituality that redirect people away from the true God toward false spiritual systems. Your children see these books. They absorb their influence even without reading them. The spiritual message of every book in your home is being transmitted into your family's consciousness. This is not superstition. This is reality. I urge you to examine your bookshelves. What is there? Remove books that contradict your faith. Remove books that glorify darkness or rebellion. Remove books written by authors whose spiritual legacy is opposed to God's kingdom. Keep books that strengthen faith, that build wisdom, that point toward God's truth, that encourage righteousness and family values. Some families notice immediate changes after doing this. There is clarity. Children suddenly focus better on their studies. Others sleep more peacefully. Why? Because the spiritual noise has been reduced. The competing voices have been silenced. Now I address something that many find difficult to accept, but you must hear this truth. Jewelry and talismans purchased from certain sources, created with certain intentions, operate as spiritual anchors for false protection. Many people, even religious people, wear jewelry or keep talismans believing they offer spiritual protection. They were purchased at stores that claim spiritual authority. They were created through rituals and spiritual traditions that do not acknowledge the one true God. They carry inscriptions or symbols from spiritual systems that directly contradict the biblical faith. I am speaking of evil eye symbols. I am speaking of talismans from Eastern spiritual traditions. I am speaking of crystals purchased with the intention of spiritual protection or healing from sources that do not honor God. I am speaking of jewelry created through ceremonies that involve false spiritual powers. When you wear such items, when you keep them in your home, you are making a spiritual choice. Whether consciously or unconsciously, you are saying to the spiritual realm, I trust this source of protection more than I trust God. This statement opens doors. The spiritual authority of God is complete. God says, I will be your shield. God says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. God does not need a competition from talismans or charms. When you rely on these items instead of on God's protection, you weaken your faith and you invite spiritual confusion. I command you, examine every piece of jewelry you wear regularly. Where did it come from? What was the spiritual intention behind its creation? What does it represent spiritually? If you cannot trace it to a source aligned with your faith, remove it. Replace it with something meaningful from your faith tradition, a cross, a religious medallion, something that declares your spiritual allegiance clearly. When you do this, you reclaim your spiritual authority. You declare that you trust God alone. And the atmosphere around you shifts. People notice it. Your presence carries different spiritual weight. Why? Because you have removed the spiritual confusion. This point will challenge some of you, but listen carefully. Not all plants are spiritually neutral. Not all natural objects carry only the neutral spiritual weight of creation. Certain plants are historically associated with witchcraft practices. Certain plants are cultivated and kept in homes specifically to channel spiritual power through false spiritual systems. Certain plants are present in homes because people purchase them from sellers who understand their spiritual significance while the homeowners do not. I am not saying all plants are problematic. Greenery that brings life, that purifies air, that represents God's creation, these are appropriate. But certain specific plant, historically used in practices contrary to God's kingdom, certain plant kept with the intention of spiritual manipulation, these should not be in your home. Some families have heirloom plants passed down through generations without understanding their spiritual origin. Some have plants recommended by people involved in spiritual practices that contradict biblical faith. Some have plants they simply felt drawn to purchase without understanding why they were drawn, and that drawing itself may be spiritually prompted by forces working against their peace. Additionally, certain natural objects carry spiritual weight. Bones, skulls, certain stones, certain artifacts, these require examination. Where did they come from? Were they obtained through occult sources? Were they created or gathered with a spiritual intention contrary to God's kingdom? Your home should reflect life, growth, and divine order. Plants that serve practical purposes, that bring beauty reflecting God's creation, these are good. But plants associated with false spiritual practices, plants kept with spiritual intention you do not fully understand, plants that simply feel wrong to your spirit, these must be removed. When you clear this from your home, the air itself seems to change. Family members report feeling lighter. The home feels more welcoming. Why? Because you have removed the spiritual weight that was pressing down. Many homes are filled with decorative items and collectibles purchased from stores or sources connected to spiritual traditions that oppose God's kingdom, a decorative box from an Eastern spiritual source, a figurine from a store specializing in New Age products, a decorative item purchased because of its aesthetic appeal without understanding its spiritual origin. These items are not merely decorative. They carry spiritual atmosphere. They speak spiritually into your home constantly. When your eyes pass over them, even unconsciously, you are receiving a spiritual message, a message that may contradict the spiritual foundation you are trying to establish. Furthermore, some decorative items are created through spiritual practices. They were blessed, charged, or prepared according to spiritual traditions that do not honor the God of the Bible. When such items are in your home, they are actively transmitting spiritual influence that works against your family's peace and progress. I have counseled families who kept certain decorative items passed down through generations, items created by relatives involved in spiritual practices contrary to Christianity. While the family members themselves were committed Christians, these items remained in their homes as reminders of their heritage. But these items were spiritually undermining their faith, their peace, and their family's direction. You must choose. Will you honor your family's spiritual legacy, or will you honor God's kingdom? These are not the same thing. If your family's legacy includes spiritual practices contrary to biblical faith, you cannot maintain both simultaneously in your home. Examine every decorative item. Where did it come from? What does it represent spiritually? Does it align with your faith foundation? If it does not, remove it. Your home's spiritual integrity is more important than preserving objects from a past spiritual foundation. When you remove such items, you are making a declaration. From this day forward, this home is dedicated to God's kingdom, and the spiritual atmosphere responds. Family members feel it. Visiting guests feel it. The peace of God establishes itself more firmly. Finally, I address something that many have not considered. Certain technology and devices in your home are designed specifically to channel spiritual content that opposes God's kingdom. I am not speaking against the technology itself. Technology is neutral. But the content delivered through technology, the spiritual messages transmitted through screens, the influence of the digital realm, these are not neutral. Some families have devices connected to entertainment platforms that consistently deliver content glorifying darkness, normalizing sin, promoting false spirituality, undermining biblical values. These devices running constantly or regularly in your home are transmitting spiritual pollution into the atmosphere. Some families have devices connected to systems that track, monitor, and influence their behavior and choices in ways they do not fully understand. Some have smart devices in bedrooms, the most intimate space, continuously active, continuously receiving and transmitting signals. I am speaking also of certain applications and digital content designed to lead people toward false spiritual systems, toward practices that undermine faith, toward connections with the spiritual sources that do not honor God. Your home's spiritual atmosphere is being shaped not only by physical objects but by the digital environment. What comes through your screen speaks into your family's consciousness constantly. If that content is contrary to your faith, it is spiritually undermining your home. I urge you to examine your technology choices. What platforms do your devices access? What content is regularly viewed in your home? Does it align with your stated spiritual values? Are the messages you are receiving through screens consistent with the spiritual foundation you want in your home? Be particularly vigilant about devices in bedrooms and children's spaces. These intimate areas should be protected from the constant intrusion of digital influences that contradict your faith. When you take control of the digital environment in your home, when you remove devices and applications that transmit spiritually contrary content, the impact is profound. Family conversation increases. Children sleep better. Others report a greater clarity. Why? Because the constant spiritual noise has been reduced. Now, I want you to understand something of tremendous importance. Simply removing these objects is not enough. The removal must be accompanied by your spiritual authority and your declaration. When you remove these items, you are not simply cleaning house. You are spiritually reclaiming your home. You are declaring your authority over the spiritual atmosphere of your dwelling. You are establishing clearly whose kingdom will rule in your space. After you have identified and removed these 7 categories of objects, I urge you to perform a spiritual cleansing of your home. Walk through each room. Speak aloud your authority. Declare that your home belongs to God's kingdom. Declare that no other spiritual force has dominion there. Declare that your family is protected, blessed, and directed by God alone. This is not manipulation of spiritual reality. This is alignment with spiritual reality. God has already given you authority over your household. You are simply exercising authority that is already yours. Many families will experience immediate shifts. Children will sleep better. Relationships will improve. Clarity will return. Doors of opportunity will open. Why? Because you have removed the spiritual impediments that were blocking God's blessing. The enemy has been subtle, but you are now awakened. You see the strategy. You understand that the physical environment carries spiritual weight. You recognize that what you allow into your home determines what spiritual atmosphere will govern your life. From this moment forward, be vigilant before bringing any new object into your home. Ask yourself, does this align with my faith? Does this represent a spiritual foundation I want in my space? Will this strengthen or weaken the spiritual atmosphere I am establishing? Your home is your fortress. Guard it well. Your family's destiny depends upon it.